What's up and welcome to KplusGaming Corner, and in this Remnant 2 video, I'm sharing a build I've been running with on Apocalypse difficulty for a while now, and it's been really fun to play, especially with all the dot damage you'll be dealing and deleting most enemies before you can even get to them. Let's not waste any time and get right into it. Starting with the archetype classes, we're a Vile Headhunter going with the Ritualist as our main and the Hunter as the secondary. Our prime perk is going to be Vile, which states that as we're applying negative status effects on enemies, in our case we're applying acid damage and also corrosion, we're now also applying the infected status, and infected victims are now taking 15% more status effect damage plus, and this is key, when enemies die, they're now spreading that status to all enemies in a pretty wide radius, 22.5 meters, so you're going to be seeing dot numbers going off all over the battlefield. For the Ritualist skill, I go with Miasma, which is causing a huge AoE burst, applying bleeding, burning, overloaded, and corroded on all enemies within 22.5 meters. This skill does a lot of dot damage and lasts 20 seconds with a cooldown of 36 seconds. I suppose you could go with Eruption as well, it can also be effective in this build, but my preference is Miasma. I don't touch Death Wish because I do not have a Death Wish, especially not on Apocalypse mode, but if that's your speed, then knock yourself out, I guess. The Ritualist damage perk is increasing our damage to enemies affected by status effects by 20%, as well as a 10% increase to crit chance. The archetype trait we get is Affliction, which is increasing status effect duration on enemies by 100%, so doubling the time those dot ticks are going off. And the way this is set up here, we're going to be melting enemies all over the battlefield, even on Apocalypse. With the Hunter archetype, we're using the Hunter's Shroud skill, which makes us semi-invisible for almost 20 seconds and marks all enemies near you, so you'll be dealing 50% more ranged and melee damage, plus we're getting another 15% crit chance against those marked enemies. The Deadeye damage perk is granting us another 40% range damage, 15% weak spot damage, and 5% ranged crit chance, so with the Hunter on, we're hitting a lot harder and killing elites and bosses that much faster. In addition to that, the Longshot archetype trait increases our ideal weapon range by 6 meters, so we can hang back and take advantage of being able to attack from longer range and still be very effective. Looking at our amulets, there's two choices to look at for this build since we're going with acid as our main attack. Now, while you could go with the Effluvian Enhancer, which is increasing acid damage by 20% and corrosive damage by 50%, and you can craft this amulet at the Drazir Replicator on Narud by the Custodian, I go with the Toxic Release Valve instead, because with this, now each time you swap weapons, we're releasing a Toxic Cloud which is dealing acid damage to enemies within a 10.5 meter radius, plus it applies Corrosion. This is a good time to mention that Corrosion acts a little different from how it was in Remnant from the Ashes. In that game, Corrosion reduced armor, but now in Remnant 2, it's increasing the damage the target takes by 10%. Small difference, but just wanted to mention that. Either way, the Toxic Release Valve is one of the keys to this build, since not only is it an effective attack and additional way to spread toxic around, it staggers enemies too, so it can buy you some time in a sticky situation if you're swarmed by enemies and need them to back up off you. And you can do this every 3 seconds, which is crazy. Now, to get this amulet, you'll need to head to Narud, and you'll need it to roll the dormant Narudian facility dungeon and look for the biome control glyph to open one of the locked rooms. I'm really hoping they don't nerf this amulet, but it is extremely OP and will definitely give you a leg up on those Apocalypse level enemies. Moving on to the rings, I've chosen to go with Zohi's Ring, which increases mod duration, Shadow of Misery, which increases status effect damage by 15%, Stone of Continuance, which increases skill duration by 15%, and the Acid Stone, which is giving us another 10% increase to all the acid damage that we're dealing out. Some other rings you could also consider would be the Band of the Fanatic, which gives another 15% status effect damage, but it reduces the duration by 65%, which is why I don't use it. There's also the Red Ring of Death, which is a random drop now in Loathsome with the new DLC. This one duplicates the status effects that you're inflicting, so there's more dot ticks going on, but those ticks are doing 10% less damage, so you have to consider that. Stone of Malevolence could also be useful here, since applying acid and corrosion would then be generating an additional 15% mod power, or Timekeeper's Jewel, which increases the duration of status effects depending on the status. For the weapons and looking at my long gun, I'm using the Black Maw AR-47, which you can purchase from Brabus at the Ward. Chicago Typewriter or the AS-10 Bulldog could also work well, and I'm using the Corrosive Rounds mod as our primary way to get that acid onto enemies. Now, because we're using Zohe's Ring as mentioned, the Corrosive Rounds are lasting a lot longer, and then I have the Fetid Wounds Mutator, which increases crit chance for this weapon based on how many status effects you have going, which is why the miasma skill is so great here. And at level 10, now weak spot and crit hits are also applying Corroded. This one's simple enough to get, just gotta go see Dwell at the Ward and he got you. I'm using the Nebula as my handgun. This one fires a stream of acid, so this one's a no-brainer in this build. You'll have to defeat the Talratha world boss on the Rood, and make sure you choose not to let him eat you, and he'll drop the crafting material you'll then take to McCabe to craft your Nebula. One of my favorite things about the Nebula, besides the fact we're farting acid all over the place, is the Nano Swarm mod, which is similar to the Swarm mod from Remnant from the Ashes, one of my favorite mods in that game. This is unleashing a swarm that's constantly attacking enemies and dealing acid damage, and again, because of Zohe's Ring, this swarm is lasting a lot longer. And then I have the Deadly Calm Mutators, so the longer we're aiming, the more range damage we're doing, plus at max level, we're getting another 10% crit chance, which never hurts. I'm using the Gas Giant for the melee weapon. This one unleashes toxic gas as you're dealing damage, and then I have the Tainted Blade Mutator here, so it's increasing melee damage per stack of Corroded on the target. For this one, you'll have to defeat Talratha again, this time letting him eat you so you fight his metaphysical version, and this one is the tougher of the two options you have, but it's well worth it if you can take him down. For the relics, I'm using the Salvaged Heart, which gives us a 50% boost to use speed, which is always ideal, and for the relic fragments, I'm choosing to go with more mod duration, ranged damage, and I threw on another 15% armor for some more protection. You can get this one at the Drazir Replicator on the Rood as well, so it's not hard to find. The trait points are up to you to spec into however you see fit. This is how I have mine set up. One trait you'll definitely want to consider though is Amplitude, which is increasing AoE size, which is great for the Miasma skill and the Toxic Release Valve Amulet. Well, there you have it, that's the build. Vile Headhunter, which basically functions like a crazy Blighted Rounds Technomancer from Outriders and will make your adventures on Apocalypse difficulty that much easier. Let me know in the comments if you're running a similar build and how you have yours set up. I love sharing ideas with you guys. And also, if you have any questions on where to find some of those rings or weapons, I'm always happy to point you guys in the right direction. Thanks so much for watching if you've made it this far, and do give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already. It's greatly appreciated and helps out our growing channel a bunch, and every little bit really helps. And if you like what you see, do consider subscribing and ringing those notification bells in order to make sure you're getting all the updates on when I'm going live or dropping new videos. Love you guys, and thanks again for all your support. I'll catch y'all on the next one. Until then, peace!